Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Now, I'm going to try and get this right. Firstly, my name's Matthew, and I'm joined by Miss Katja, who is from a company called Climate with a K. How are you doing today?
Hi, Matt. It's good to meet you, and I'm doing very well. It's a lovely day here in Copenhagen, and yeah, as you probably also know, we just closed fundraising and had that announced last week. So I think the mood couldn't be better right now.
Fantastic. That's great. So we've caught you at just the right time. Before we get into that, tell our viewers and our listeners, if you don't mind, a little bit about Climate, what it is, and your role within the company.
Well, first off, I'm a co-founder and CEO of Climate. We have existed since the beginning of 2020, so just before another critical world event happened. But the purpose of what we do is to scale the carbon removal industry. So when we talk about carbon removal, it's basically all technologies that remove CO2 from the air. And they can be broadly categorized in three categories, which is nature-based solutions that most of us know of, which would be forest, for instance. We have hybrid solutions, which could be, for instance, biochar, a way of paralyzing biomass. And then the engineered solutions for removing CO2 and permanently storing it, which would be technologies like direct air capture or bioenergy carbon capture and storage. And basically at Climate, we work with a broad range of technologies within the carbon removal space. We basically perform a comprehensive due diligence on the project performance, and then we facilitate agreements with companies, on the other hand, that have a net zero commitment, meaning that they either already now are removing their unavoidable emissions, or they will be doing that in the future, or they have committed to do so in the future, which means that we can actually create a financial incentive for basically bringing the capacity to the market that is needed to deliver on that in the future. We call that carbon purchase agreements. So that's ultimately what we do. We're the last step in that journey of measure, reduce, remove. So we only focus on carbon removal, high quality and durable technologies for removing CO2.
Okay, lovely. The most important time now to be doing stuff like that. I'd like to speak to you a bit about those technologies, but tell us about your good news before we get into that.
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, we had a funding announcement coming out last week, where we've now closed a 3.5 million euro seed round, which is just a huge testament to the fact that we're, actually making a difference in this market, and it also gives us an even stronger base to basically grow from and grow faster. So we already see that our business is mostly international, with our biggest markets being outside of Denmark and actually being both the UK and the US and Europe based. So now we're going to have even more capacity to further expand our commercial efforts, enhance our product offering, as well as you can say, strengthen the team with some of the key roles that we haven't really prioritized yet, you can say.
Okay, fantastic. Well, congratulations on that. And obviously you're doing good work, so we're all rooting for you. Let's take a step back now. Let's talk a little bit about your journey into Climate. Where did that begin?
Well, it might be a little bit of an untraditional road into this market, but then again, it's also a very new market. But I started my career in consulting, where I've been working at the Boston Consulting Group, and I've also been working a lot in shipping in Denmark, and had a short stint after that, where I was a partner in a blockchain venture studio, where we're basically the main thing we were basically doing was to create a way of tracing biofuels for the shipping industry using synthetic DNA. So I already got to sort of discover a little bit the world around, you can say, how do we actually work with the natural resources and also try to transition our ways of operating into more sustainable ways. Then I became a mother for the first time. Now I have 2 sons, but this was my first son. And then I think the time when he hit 3 months, which was in the beginning of 2020, we in Denmark had one of the warmest winters we've ever had. I think it's now, ever since, it's been a new record every year. But back then there was no snow inside, which is something we always have. There was very, very high degrees, and ultimately led me to try to discover the area of how do we actually restore the balance in the atmosphere. So how do we actually fix the the damage that has already been done, and what's the right incentives for doing that? And that led me to actually discover the world of carbon removal. And coming from a financial and strategic background, it was also very clear that the right incentives we need in this market needs to be financially sound. We're looking very much into how can we create the right agreements that basically bridge the gap between the commitments we have coming in the future and the need that we actually have to build up their capacity already today. Mm. So very much inspired by the renewable energy space and how that has developed. We're really trying to fast track the development in the carbon removal space as well. Yeah, and I have 2 co-founders with me in the company that decided to join me on this journey. Luckily, one of them is Simon Bayer, who has a PhD in this area. So he has developed out our full due diligence framework and works with everything we do on the supply side.
Okay, terrific. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about finding the right people to take on a project like this, because what you're doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there's a personal attachment to the issue. This is something that you've noticed, you've seen it with your own eyes, and you want to be part of this. And I suppose in saying so, you want the right people with you on a project that is this important. How did you manage to go about that?
Well, I would argue that most people that operate in the space of sustainability, but also in carbon removal, specifically, they have a personal angle into this. I guess you need to have an equal desire to build up a successful company, but equally also a desire to drive forward the agenda that you believe in. So I haven't really met anyone yet that are not also in some way personally invested in actually building up this market. But that also meant that finding the right people could definitely be hard. I think there was a portion of luck in terms of finding the founder team that I have with me now, and then also a portion of really selling my vision of what climate could be in the future. And when I did that, I met my first co-founder, Messimil, who had come from a CMO position in another scale up, you could say, at that point in time, and had also founded a company before. So he basically knew the drill, but he believed in me and the vision, and also believed very much in the vision himself. And out of that came the contact to Simon Bayer, which is then the third co-founder that we have on board. It's been a development, but I would say it's not hard to find good people to work in the company, because everyone has a huge desire to actually drive what we do forward. Yeah, I could speak a lot about that, so I'm gonna pause here.
Can you tell us? There's obviously a lot of news and stories about what's going on, and everybody seems to have a certain idea of what they think is taking place. You must have had some kickback, maybe some resistance. Have you faced any big challenges, or have people generally been quite accepting and open to you?
Oh no, I would definitely say, building up a new market from scratch, we've been dealing with the legacy markets, the legacy carbon markets, you can say, which in many regards have been a little bit more of a Wild West, where there wasn't a lot of transparency, and most of the projects were based out of what we call avoided emissions projects, which is basically projects that claim to reduce future emissions by doing an action today. the action could be several things. It could be replacing cook stoves. It could be putting up windmills or solar parks or anything like that. But the reality of that is just that it's very, very hard to quantify that avoided emissions because you only have the state of today to compare it to. And at the same time, looking into that market, you also see that it's very, very hard to use those credits to claim, you can say, a neutrality or net zero strategy for a company because it ultimately goes towards reducing the emissions in the value chain and not towards removing, you can say, unavoidable emissions. So we've very much dealt in the beginning with that legacy market and really having to explain over and over again what it is that we do and why it is that carbon removal is such an important aspect of all the scenarios that we're facing in order to live up to any sort of climate commitment we have on a global level. So by now, even if we look at the most ambitious reduction scenarios, which is not at all the trajectory we're on right now, we're still going to need to remove 10 gigatons of CO2 by 2050 and onwards to sustain that living. And that's just something have to sort of repeat over and over again. But luckily, I also think that the market has developed a lot, and we're starting to see that it's matured, and the understanding is actually much more widespread now. So the big corporates that are important to drive this development forward are starting to step up and basically include this as part of their sustainability strategies.
Oh, terrific. That's very good news all around. We've spoken about what's going on and about the market. You said that the market is maturing, so it's a good time to be there. And how do you see the near future for this? Do you think everyone's going to get on board? Are we going to gain more traction? How does it look if you look ahead?
Well, we see that the most recognized frameworks we have within the sustainability space, such as science-based target initiatives and others, are recognizing carbon removal as a step to remove unavoidable emissions. It's only on the high quality and permanent projects, which is a very important step. I think it's becoming more and more apparent that it's a comprehensive part of a full sustainability strategy for each company. And with the amount of net zero commitments coming in, which I don't have the updated number, but last time I checked, it was 89% of world capital that is basically committed to net zero. We also need to understand that a critical part of that is that we need to build up the capacity for removing CO2 from the atmosphere to sort of adhere to those. The most ambitious companies are also looking into the historic emissions, which is I would say an even more important development because that basically speeds up the process a lot. So I would definitely say it's only going to increase from here. It's what we see in terms of the companies that we work with and the dialogues that we have, and it's just such an important development to see that the recognition is becoming global now.
Absolutely. So that's an important point that you brought up, becoming global. So how far out have you spread for now? What is your reach like? Who's playing ball? Are there people that markets that you're struggling to get into? What's happening with this expansion?
I mean, there are a lot of things that are happening globally on a macro level or even on a country level that drives the development in each of the countries. Then you have some elements that are happening on, for instance, in the EU that is driving a certain part of the development as well. So we of course have to be attentive to what is going on in the world. With things like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, but also the required carbon accounting coming up in Europe, or in the EU. It's just some of those things that are basically making our lives a lot easier because we need data and we need incentives for our companies to basically start working with carbon removal. So for us, we are going to strengthen our position in Europe and UK that we have been working quite extensively with. And then we're, of course, also going to extend our operations in the US because there are a lot of positive indications that US is going to be a global leader in this space. One of them being that they also had the first public commitment to carbon removal from the energy department. So I think there are exciting developments, and for us the most important is just to stay on top of what happens and make sure that we are ready to sort of act on the opportunities that arise.
Let's take a step backwards. Something you mentioned in the beginning that I'd like to touch on. We spoke a little bit. You mentioned some of the technologies. For people who are not aware of what's going on, can you give us an overview of what sort of things are available? What's doing well? What can people get involved with?
I mean, some of the most exciting things that is developing in the world is direct air capture on a global scale, and we're just seeing that the capacity is increasing significantly. And direct air capture, for sort of a very simple way of explaining it, is big ventilators that can basically isolate the CO2 out of the free air. And then the process afterwards is that you can then transform that into stone in the right conditions, which is why right now the projects that are happening on Iceland and then in Kenya, actually. So I would say it's super exciting to see that there are so many exciting developments going on in the direct air capture space, and it's really where we start to say that both the transparency and the validation of the projects is also increasing quite a lot, because you can very easily measure exactly how much CO2 has been captured. But equally, we're also starting to see a lot of opportunities arising in the hybrid space. As I mentioned, biochar is one of the most promising hybrid technologies for removing CO2 as well. So what is happening in this space is that we both have a lot of certification bodies basically coming in to improve the certification going on here. We also see a lot of insurance actually now being offered on carbon removal credits coming from biochar projects, which is an important step as well, because that means that we can start to add that level of certainty when we work with large corporates as well. But even also, if you look at the nature-based solutions, I mean, we know that forest has always been an important way not only to sort of store carbon, but equally also to sort of support the ecosystem. And it's something that you can say that we also need to support very heavily. And it's definitely a transition when we look at the carbon removal space from nature-based solutions to hybrid solutions to more engineered solutions. But we can never forget that we also have to sustain the nature-based solutions for basically storing carbon, because that also has so many other benefits that we can't oversee.
I have one last one for you. Just for any of our viewers and listeners out there, you've taken on quite a project. I mean, with what you've told us today, the responsibility, the reach, everything that's involved. What advice would you give to somebody looking at a project like this, recognizing a need and saying, look, this is something I need to do, something that I believe needs to be done? How do you take those steps? What would you tell somebody looking to begin a journey like yours?
For companies or corporates in this space, it's definitely the first step that is necessary is to get the data in place. So do carbon, make a carbon accounting project where you basically get the right baseline for what are your current emissions, what are historic emissions, and that sort of data points. Like that's the beginning to get engaged in this market. And then the second step, which is the most important step in this journey, it is to make a reduction plan, which means how do I reduce everything I can in the value chain. So how do I reduce as much as I can to bring down those emissions? And then once that is in place, the sort of reduction strategy, you can say, then I would suggest that the company makes a strategy for how to remove what we call unavoidable emissions. And for that strategy, I would always propose to have a portfolio of technologies that basically span across the nature, hybrid engineered solutions that I talked about before, to make sure that there is both a sensibility on the budget side for the customer, because a way to basically tackle this is to put an internal tax on carbon and decide what is the level that you're going to pay for each of those tons of CO2 that you cannot reduce, and then put together a portfolio that basically spans and both have novel and frontier technologies, but equally also have some hybrid and some nature-based solutions. And it's of course up to the individual company. But that would be the journey that I would always recommend. Reducing emissions is the number one priority. Removing unavoidable emissions is also important, but it should come after a comprehensive reduction strategy, so we make sure that we have a sustainable way forward. And then for sort of the removal portfolio, make sure that there is good transparency and good knowledge base on which project it is that are included in that. So I can tell you from climate side, what we do is that we collect more than 150 data points on each of the projects that we work with, to basically have the level of detail that is needed to report on the initiatives, but also the certainty that they are on how they're going to perform. So I would definitely recommend having all the necessary data to back up the carbon removal portfolio, to make it, to both have confidence in what's going to happen, but also to be able to communicate it better to the stakeholders that needs to hear about it.
Terrific. So there it is, everybody. If you're not doing it yet, measure, reduce, remove. And we can all work together. Katja, is there anything you'd like to tell our viewers and our listeners before we sign off? Anything you think is important to mention, or maybe where they can find you?
You're always welcome to reach out. I can be found on LinkedIn, where I'm also highly active in sharing my views on the space, but also on the life of an entrepreneur in many respects. They can go to our website, climate.co, KLIMATE.co. But then I would also just say it's never too late to get started on a sustainability journey. And what I often realize when I speak to people, especially also young people or young professionals getting into their first jobs, that they experience so much climate anxiety. And once you actually take ownership of that process and you sort of implement a sustainability strategy in your company, or in the way that you choose your employer or your bank or whatever it is, then the empowerment starts to kick in. And it happened for me, definitely, that I feel like we're doing a huge difference every day, and it gives me the energy and the power to move forward and to keep the hopes up.
Thank you very much for your time. We will be keeping our eye on you. And hopefully there are some people out there that are going to hear what you said today and make a conscious effort to improve the conditions around them. So, Katja, I can't thank you enough for your time today.
Yeah, and thank you, Matt. It's been a pleasure.